They told me not to dig any deeper, but I didn't listen. And now you will find out why it was better to leave it alone. Wait until the end to find out. I never trusted the way the Bluetooth notification blinked onto the bottom corner of the screen. We were mid-movie, some old rom-com she pretended to love because she knew I hated them. The notification just appeared out of nowhere. Zane's AirPods would like to pair. For a second, I thought maybe it was the neighbors, maybe a glitch. But then I saw how her body tensed. She reached for the remote before I even moved. Quick, too quick. And when I asked, calm as ever, what it was, she said the words without looking at me. Probably a neighbor. Same line you'd use if someone asked about a dent on a rental car. But it wasn't just the name that stirred something in me. It was his name, Zane, a piece of her past I never wanted to know but always remembered. He was the story she told with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. A friend from childhood, a troublemaker, a dropout, a guy who once broke into a liquor store and said it was a dare. The kind of person you outgrow. She said she had. Maybe she wanted me to believe it, and maybe I did for longer than I should have. The next day I set the trap. Subtle, measured. I parked the car close enough to be seen, left the trunk cracked like I forgot something, then walked down the road pretending I left. It wasn't until an hour later, when I returned quiet as dusk, that I saw the truth pull into our driveway in the shape of a scratched-up sedan. Not familiar, but not random either. I kept my distance, walked around back, careful not to step on the gravel path that would give me away. The back door was slightly ajar, and inside I heard it, her laugh, carefree, loose, not the one she used with me. Then I heard her voice, high and flippant. He won't suspect a thing anyway. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I didn't need to. I walked back to my car, slow, methodical, hands shoved deep in my pockets like I was just out for air. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I went home, unpacked the groceries, and saw the receipt on the fridge, as if fate was mocking me with sloppy details. Z. Sutherland. 8 gallons of gas. $28.19. Not a neighbor. Not a glitch. A man. One who had his name saved in her laughter, and now printed in our kitchen. That night I didn't move. I didn't speak. She came home, showered, curled up beside me with damp hair and the scent of lavender shampoo. She snored lightly. I laid there, eyes open, listening to the rhythm of a stranger sleeping beside me. By the next morning, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I wanted to be sure. So I started small. I stayed patient. She thought I was quiet because I was busy, stressed. She didn't know I was studying. Her. A week later, on a sunny Saturday morning, she announced her plans in that overly cheerful tone that people use when they're lying. Spa day, she said. Girls only. I nodded and smiled like a fool. The moment she left, I got to work. Her laptop had backups saved on the cloud. All I had to do was access the one synced with our family tablet. Innocent enough. I wasn't hacking, I was verifying. Within 10 minutes, I had it. An appointment marked in the calendar. Yoga with Z. Yoga. I called in a favor with the neighbor, asked if she could watch the kids, said I needed to hit the gym. Truth was, I followed Haley, staying 2 cars behind like I was part of traffic, blending in, never tailgating too close. She pulled into the strip mall near downtown. I saw her get out in her leggings and hoodie, mats slung over her shoulder, just like she was heading to yoga. But she didn't walk into the studio. She walked past it, right into the grocery store, and less than 5 minutes later, slid into a familiar car. Zane's. They sat there. No yoga, no mats, just 2 people with history, stealing moments in daylight. I watched them drive off. I trailed them to the kind of motel that charges by the hour. No valet, no front desk flowers, just faded doors, cigarette butts, and secrets. Room 214. I parked across the street and watched. I waited 15 minutes. Then I ordered a pizza. Extra pepperoni under the name Zane Sutherland. I gave the motel address, the room number, paid online, and left a hefty tip. Then I launched the drone. The footage was shaky at first, wind gusts, but then it steadied, just in time to see a delivery guy knock, laugh, and hand over the box. 2 minutes later, Zane burst out of the room in nothing but a towel, panicked, scanning the sky like he knew something was off. He wasn't wrong. Back home, I tossed her damp yoga clothes into the washer, checked on the kids, and said what I hadn't said in years, with a real smile this time. Mom's at yoga today. She'll be back later. The smile didn't leave my face for hours. Not because I was happy, because I was finally certain. The next few days passed like chapters in a book I had already read. Measured, familiar, scripted with a kind of eerie clarity. I knew what she'd say before she said it, how she'd move, what lies she'd pick from her mental drawer. She didn't realize the stage had shifted. She was still performing for a man who no longer believed the play was real. That Tuesday morning, I kissed her cheek before she left for work. She looked at me, eyes searching, almost suspicious, like she sensed something was different. I smiled wider. She let it go. Maybe she chalked it up to a good mood or better sleep. Truth was, I hadn't really slept. I'd been planning. She worked late that night, said a new project had everyone scrambling at the office. "Don't wait up," she texted. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji and headed to the garage. The van I had bought days ago was waiting, still smelling faintly of the last owner's cheap air freshener. I'd tinted the windows myself, installed a basic surveillance kit, 2 hidden cameras, motion sensors, and a Wi-Fi router with a private VPN. I wasn't just watching anymore, I was documenting. That night, while the kids were asleep, I parked near Zane's place. A sad little house with chipped siding, overgrown hedges, and the kind of blinds that always stay closed. He hadn't changed, still living like the world owed him something. Around 11, the garage door opened. I adjusted the camera angle just as Haley walked out carrying a small suitcase. Her hoodie was pulled up, but I knew her walk. She glanced around like she thought she was careful. She wasn't. She got into an Uber and disappeared into the dark. I followed, keeping 3 cars behind. We drove across town, past the familiar, past the safe, into a part of the city where the streetlights flickered and buildings wore shadows like armor. She stopped at a bank, alone. Not the one we used together, not the one we opened accounts in after the wedding. A different one. A small branch of a credit union she once said was too inconvenient to switch to. She walked in carrying the suitcase and came out 20 minutes later with nothing in her hands. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just infidelity, it was theft. The next day, I called in a favor from Ian, a guy I met years ago when I was helping him rebuild a hacked server at his office. He owed me. He got me in. Not just the customer side of the bank's portal, inside. I gave him just enough information, let him believe it was for a fraud case. By that evening, I had what I needed. She had withdrawn $12,000 from our joint account the previous week and deposited it under a new account in her name only. She had lied to the bank. She'd marked the account as gifted funds, flagged as inheritance, claiming I had no legal connection to it. It was laughable. My name had been on the withdrawal. She hadn't even bothered to cover the trail properly. The statements were printed, time-stamped, annotated, and filed into a steel lockbox I bolted to the floor of the garage beneath an old tarp and a rusted toolbox. If she ever found it, I wanted her to know that I had seen everything. That evening, I brought home her favorite takeout, sushi from the expensive place she always claimed we couldn't afford. I plated it neatly, lit a candle, even poured her wine. She looked surprised but smiled. "Rough day?" she asked as she set down her purse. "Just figured we deserved something nice," I said. She picked at her food, glanced at me between bites. "You're being sweet," she murmured, not sure whether to believe it. I handed her a napkin, then said it. "So how was yoga?" She froze just slightly, half a blink too long, just enough for me to see the wires behind her eyes spin. Then she smiled again. "It was good. Same instructor." I leaned back in my chair, still smiling. "Great, because I signed you up for a new group on Saturday. Early morning slot. Supposed to be more advanced. Let's see if you show up." Her fork paused in midair. She laughed, a nervous kind, like someone unsure if a joke just landed or a trap had just sprung. I raised my glass and clinked hers. "To flexibility," I said. She barely touched her wine after that. The following morning she left early, claimed she had to meet her friend Melissa for breakfast. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I already had enough for the next step. I spent the rest of the morning refining the footage, syncing timestamps from the drone and the motel entry camera with her phone's location history. She didn't think I knew her passcode. She was wrong. She used the same 4 digits for everything. Her dad's birthday, every image, every withdrawal, every appointment that wasn't really an appointment, I put into a folder labeled Horizon. I chose the name because she thought she was walking toward a new life. She didn't realize what was waiting on the other side. But I wasn't ready to end it yet. That night, I watched her fold laundry while humming to herself, barefoot in the living room, as if she hadn't spent her afternoon draining our account. I watched her kiss the kids goodnight and curl up on the couch beside me, like the world hadn't shifted. She pointed at a scene on the TV, laughing at something ridiculous. I nodded and laughed along. Inside, I was building a war room. Outside, I was the perfect husband. It was almost cruel, how easy it was to fake normal. Almost. The van had become more than surveillance. It was strategy on wheels. Parked 2 blocks from Zane's house, it blended perfectly beside an old warehouse and a chain-link fence. By now, I knew his schedule better than I knew my own. He barely left. No job, no drive. But Haley, she came like clockwork. 3 nights a week, always after dark, always in the same hoodie and jeans combo she thought made her look invisible. She wasn't invisible to me. Not anymore. That night she arrived early, stepping out of her car with a red suitcase. Not a gym bag, not a backpack. A suitcase, the one we used on road trips, the kind our kids drew stickers on when they were younger. She wheeled it into Zane's garage like it belonged there. That's when I knew. She wasn't visiting anymore. She was investing. I waited. Then right on cue, an Uber pulled in. I followed them across town in the van, quiet as smoke, tracking them to a small bank branch downtown. She walked in with the suitcase and came out 20 minutes later with nothing but her phone. That was all I needed to see. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I called Ian. He owed me a favor from a job I helped him cover back in 2021. I gave him the info. By the time I had my coffee the next morning, I had the internal logs. There it was. $12,000 withdrawn from our joint account, rerouted into a new personal deposit. Labeled business development. I laughed. She had written me out of the narrative and didn't even do it cleanly. I stored the documents in a steel lockbox in the garage, under the bins labeled Christmas lights. No one ever touched those in May. Inside it, I had folders now, labeled by category, infidelity, theft, deception, and a burner phone, just in case she got bold. That night, I brought home her favorite Thai food. I even poured the wine. She looked at the spread and raised a brow. What's the occasion? You've been working hard. Figured you could use something nice. Her smile was too quick. She chewed cautiously, watching me like I might say more. I didn't. How was yoga? I asked after a beat. She blinked once, just a flicker, then recovered. Hot. Almost passed out. Sounds intense, I said, topping off her glass. The next morning, while she left early for breakfast with Melissa, I went to the actual yoga studio and waited. No Haley. I asked the front desk if she was signed up. No one by that name today, they said with a smile. Perfect. I didn't confront her that day. I simply watched her return home later, with fresh nails, a new top, and a text open on her phone from Z. She had no idea I'd seen it all. No clue I had real-time access to her fantasy. The next day, I drove the van out to a storage facility an hour out of town. Paid cash, rented a unit. I moved all my surveillance gear there. Cameras, backups, folders. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was preserving the timeline. This wasn't about catching her. I already had that. This was about proving she'd never once looked back. Not when she smiled at him, not when she passed our bank card to a teller, and definitely not when she fed the kids dinner, like the world hadn't already split down the middle. She thought she was moving forward, but she was walking into an archive, built by the man she thought was too soft to notice. Monday morning came like a switchblade, sharp, cold, and final. I'd let her walk long enough, let her wade waist-deep into deception, thinking it was a vacation. She didn't know I had been building exits behind her, doors only I could open when the time came. And today, it came. I told her I'd be gone on a business trip for a few days. She barely looked up from her phone. Safe travels, she said, blowing me a kiss while scrolling through what I already knew was a group chat with no real friends in it. I kissed the kids, told them I'd be back before the weekend, then dropped them off at their grandmother's house. Smiles and snacks and bedtime stories they didn't know were shields from a storm their mother had no idea was about to hit. By noon, I was parked outside Zane's house in the courier uniform I'd picked up from a supply store 3 towns over. Brown polo, captain's sunglasses. I wore anonymity like armor. The box was labeled "For the Cheater." Inside, copies of Haley's house keys, still warm from the printer, still sharp, still hers. Also inside, printed screenshots of the motel reservation, the bank transactions, and drone footage of her and Zane laughing in bed through the sheer motel curtains. I sealed it with tape and a note that read, "Take her. I'll be gifting you something else soon." I walked up, rang the bell, and left the box by the door. Didn't wait, didn't linger. I got back in the van and drove off like I was just another name on a clipboard. I didn't even glance in the mirror. 2 days later, she came home to chaos disguised as clarity. All her belongings, bagged, boxed, and waiting in the garage. Her closet was empty, her makeup drawer wiped clean, her shoes lined up in perfect rows by the door like they were waiting for a new owner to claim them. I even included a luggage tag on her suitcase. C. Sutherland, Unit 7A. Just to make it easier for her to find the man who already had half her loyalty. She stood in the doorway, blinking like a woman waking up mid-dream. "What is this?" she asked, her voice cracking. I didn't answer her. I was in the kitchen making lunch for the kids when I calmly said, "I only need one thing, truth, and I want it in front of them." She froze. "I'm not doing this with them here," she snapped. So I raised my voice just enough for it to echo down the hall. "Kids, come here a minute." They came, rubbing their eyes from screen time, confused by the tone. She stepped between them and me like I was a stranger. "Don't do this," she said through clenched teeth. I crouched and looked at the kids. "Mom made a mistake," I said slowly, carefully. "But we forgive people, right? Even when they do something really wrong." They looked at her. They didn't nod. They didn't move. They just looked. Silent. Like they were old enough to know something had shattered. She turned and ran. Not fast, not dramatic. Just ran. Like she was hoping it was still possible to outrun what was already printed, documented, backed up twice, and sealed in a folder inside a safe she didn't even know existed. That night, I sat between my kids on the couch, watching cartoons with no volume. The dog climbed into my lap like nothing had changed. I wasn't crying. I wasn't broken. I was anchored. And they knew it too. But Haley wasn't done. Not yet. The next week, she filed for divorce, claimed emotional manipulation and verbal control, said I was cold, distant, claimed she feared for her safety, but claims without proof or noise. And she forgot that I didn't just have proof. I had structure. I hired a private investigator. Within 2 weeks, I had Zane's criminal history, a prior assault conviction, domestic violence with a woman in Nevada, a bar fight that led to a broken nose and a lawsuit that never went to court. I compiled it all into a dossier, thick enough to crack glass, and sent it to both our attorneys. But I wasn't done. I scheduled a meeting with the school principal, printed footage of Haley and Zane drinking from a bottle of wine in his car, parked not 5 feet from a playground where kids were still running in the background. The video was time-stamped, GPS verified, and backed up on a cloud server under a dummy email address. When Child Services got involved, they didn't ask me questions. They handed me paperwork. Her visitation rights were revoked. Temporarily, they said. But we both knew temporary turns permanent when the file is thick and the photos are clear. I didn't gloat. I didn't brag. But that night, I brought home a puppy. A big one, black coat, golden eyes. The kids named him Rocket. He barked at every knock on the door, slept by their beds like a guardian carved from myth. I told them, "These guards will protect us now." Haley didn't call that night. She didn't dare. I knew she'd fight back. People like Haley don't accept consequences. They rewrite the rules. A week after her visitation was suspended, I got the first message from her lawyer, a demand letter. She wanted the house, half of the savings, and primary custody. Claimed I'd created a hostile environment. Claimed I'd emotionally damaged her with sudden paranoia and erratic behavior. She underestimated just how deep I'd prepared. My attorney responded with 3 words: "We welcome discovery." Haley wasn't ready for what came next. I filed counterclaims with full documentation: surveillance footage, banking records, text message timestamps, and signed statements from the child services interview. Her lies collapsed the moment they were asked to stand on paper. She didn't have facts. I had facts with folders, and I had people, real people. Her own lawyer requested a pause in proceedings by the end of the week. That's when I made my quiet move. I requested full custody, not shared, full. But Haley wasn't done flailing. She went to the police, claimed I had installed cameras in the house to monitor her. She forgot she'd once signed off on the home security system herself. During the summer, we had break-ins down the street. I had her signature on the service contract. Her complaint died before it reached the first desk. Then she tried again, accused me of stalking her. But I had been careful, very careful. Everything was remote, timed, legal, and documented. I hadn't stepped near her physically since the day I boxed up her clothes. Even the footage I used came from publicly accessible angles and third-party drone deliveries that matched timestamps to receipts. Still, she tried a third time, said I was manipulating the kids. But the school's guidance counselor had been documenting their progress since the separation. And the kids? Happier, sleeping better, no more stomach aches, no more acting out. Rocket, our new dog, had become their emotional guardrail, and I had the logs to prove it. Then came the twist she thought would end me. One Friday morning, a reporter showed up at the gate, said he was following a lead on a domestic situation involving potential financial coercion. I knew immediately who had planted the story. She wanted the narrative back. That was her last weapon, image. If she couldn't win in court, she'd try to smear me publicly. What she didn't know was that I'd already anticipated it. That same week, my private investigator sent me a file I hadn't even asked for. Turns out Zane had tried to open a gym once, used investor funds, lost everything, got sued. And worse, Haley had co-signed his loan under her maiden name. I ran the numbers. She had been slowly pulling funds from our savings for over a year to cover his debt without ever telling me. So I made one phone call. A contact I'd kept in the financial sector owed me a favor. Quietly, he leaked the gym collapse story to the same journalist. And just like that, the article flipped. What began as a story about a husband accused of financial abuse became an expose on a failed business, hidden debts, and marital betrayal with financial fraud laced into the cracks. The article stopped her cold. She went dark for 3 days. No texts, no calls, no court activity. That Sunday, I threw a small dinner party for friends and neighbors. I called it family night. Just me, the kids, some board games, and a few close faces who knew the whole story but hadn't heard it laid bare. At the center of the table, a cake, chocolate. I had the bakery write something simple but heavy. To a better life, without lies. And then, halfway through dessert, I played the clips. The drone footage of Zane scrambling in a towel, her voice saying, "He won't suspect a thing." The fake yoga appointments, the bank statement withdrawals, the photo of her hand in Zane's at the motel parking lot, time-stamped and zoomed. I didn't explain. I didn't narrate. I just let the truth hang there in the silence, like thunder before lightning. And then she walked in. Haley. She knew about the party. She came anyway. Maybe she thought she could play the sympathy card. Maybe she thought there was still a version of her that could be saved. But once the footage played, she froze. Her knees buckled for just a second. Then came the tears. Ugly, real, not staged for once. She ran outside, tripping over the last step like it betrayed her too. I followed her, found her near the edge of the driveway, trembling and gasping. I walked right up to her, calm. I pulled a photo from my coat pocket, her, smiling in Zane's car, his hand on her thigh, her face full of joy she hadn't shown me in years. I handed it to her. "You thought I'd never find out," I said, voice low even. "But I knew from day one. I was just playing to break you slowly." She looked at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore. She was right. By the time the next hearing rolled around, Haley had become a stranger in her own skin. The courtroom lights made her look hollow, hair tangled in a bun she once spent an hour perfecting. makeup thin enough to see the shaking underneath. She sat across from me at the table, her lawyer whispering into her ear, but her eyes stayed locked on mine, like she still couldn't believe I wasn't blinking. Like she was searching for the version of me she used to manipulate, the one who would have caved by now. But that man, he was long gone. The judge asked if either party had more evidence to submit. Her lawyer tried to object to the timeline I presented, the bank logs, the surveillance, the false alibis. But none of it mattered. I watched the judge skim through the file like he already knew where it was going. He looked up once and asked, "Mrs. Sutherland, were you aware that funds from the joint account were being used to cover debt related to a third-party business venture?" She didn't answer. She just stared. That was the moment I realized she still hadn't accepted what was happening. Not really. She thought this was just a bad stretch of road, that the same trick she used on me could somehow work on people with robes and gavels. But court doesn't bend for charm, and the truth, it doesn't care if you look tired. That afternoon, I returned home to a quiet house. The kids were at school. Rocket, our dog, lounged on the patio like he owned the sun. I made myself a coffee and stared out the window for a while, watching the wind drag fallen leaves across the lawn. That's when I decided the final piece of this puzzle needed to come, not in the courtroom, but in the home she betrayed. Our wedding anniversary was in 2 weeks. She forgot, of course. Hadn't mentioned it in years. I remembered it like a scar remembers the cut. That morning I sent out invitations under the header, "Family Celebration." No explanation, just a time and place. Our home, 6 p.m., catered dinner. I invited everyone, friends, her co-workers, neighbors, even her parents, who still hadn't publicly chosen a side. I wanted them all there to witness, not a fight, not a breakdown, but a reveal. She arrived halfway through dinner, hair done, makeup polished, a cream dress like she still had something left to prove. People smiled politely, unsure whether to hug her or just nod. She waved, breezy and fake. I met her in the foyer and handed her a plate. She looked at it, then at me, confused. "You really made this big of a deal out of a custody win?" "No," I said calmly. "This isn't about custody. This is about truth." I tapped my glass twice. Everyone quieted. The screen behind me lit up. And then, clips, photos, voice recordings, a scroll of her withdrawals, a side-by-side shot of her yoga calendar next to motel check-ins, a time-stamped clip of Zane holding her hand in the passenger seat, her head on his shoulder. She didn't move. She didn't blink. One of her friends gasped. Her father stood. Her mother whispered something under her breath and shook her head. The room went still. And Haley? She ran, not storming, not screaming, just ran. Like she'd suddenly remembered she left something burning somewhere. But it was already too late. She shoved past the front door and vanished into the night like it was hiding a way back to before. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she'd just been. Then I walked over to the cake. Big white frosting, simple letters in bold chocolate script. "To a better life, without lies." The guests didn't say much after that. Most just nodded, thanked me for dinner, and left. Some hugged the kids. Some shook my hand with the kind of look men give each other when one of them survives something the other prays he never has to endure. That night, I tucked the kids into bed and sat on the floor beside Rocket. My phone buzzed twice. Messages from her I didn't open. Then a third one, a voicemail. I played it. She was crying. "You didn't have to do it like that. You didn't have to humiliate me." She was wrong again. That wasn't humiliation. That was clarity. The next day, her employer called her into a meeting. They had received the link, anonymous, time-stamped, and tied to the joint account she had used for work travel. The HR rep flagged the expense report for the Hawaii retreat she took with Zane, called it inappropriate entanglement using shared funds. They let her go that afternoon. The video had started making the rounds online. It wasn't viral, but it was real. A quiet wave of shares through friend groups, co-workers, forums she used to brag in. People were talking. And Zane? Gone. Deleted his social media, packed his car, skipped a court date for unpaid fines and disappeared into whatever basement he crawled out of. Even her own parents stopped answering her calls. Her sister, who once called me boring at Christmas dinner, texted me a single sentence. "I didn't know it was this bad." I didn't respond because I wasn't interested in redemption arcs. This wasn't about payback anymore. This was about record, a documented sequence of choices, each one hers. I didn't need to raise my voice or punch a wall. I just needed her to realize that she wrote the end of this story the moment she let someone else into our home through a text message. She had thought she was untouchable. Now she couldn't touch anything at all. It took a month for the court to finalize everything. Custody, property, financial penalties. The paperwork was precise, cold, unforgiving, just like I had intended. I sat in that courtroom like a man attending a funeral, where the only thing buried was a lie that had lived too long. The judge's voice was steady as he read through the terms, but every sentence felt like punctuation on a betrayal I had already processed and packed away. Haley didn't speak. Not when the custody was handed to me without argument. Not when her visitation was restricted to supervised Sundays twice a month. Not even when the judge told her she owed restitution for hidden transactions and would be personally responsible for the legal costs. She just stared straight ahead like she was bracing for another wave, still hoping the tide might turn back in her favor. But the tide was gone, and she was alone on a shoreline that had nothing left to give. After court, I took the kids out for milkshakes. We sat at that corner booth we always used to visit on birthdays. They laughed about school, Rocket curled up under the table, and for the first time in a year, the quiet didn't feel like a warning. The next evening, Haley tried to break into the house. It was just after midnight. I was reading in bed when the alarm system shrieked to life. I rushed downstairs, flashlight in hand, heart already steady before I reached the glass. The kitchen window was shattered, jagged edges of our past still clinging to the frame. And there she was, Haley, half soaked in rain, hair plastered to her face, shoulders heaving like she'd sprinted from some collapsing version of her life. Her eyes met mine through the beam of my flashlight. She looked like a stranger caught in the act of becoming someone she swore she never would. "Open the door," she mouthed. I didn't. Behind me, the kids stirred upstairs. Rocket barked once, sharp and protective. Lights turned on in the neighbors' windows. And then the sirens came, fast, loud, final. I stepped outside just far enough to meet the officers as they pulled up. They found her standing in the mud, hands trembling, mascara streaked across cheeks that hadn't felt clean in weeks. She looked at me like I was the villain in a story she'd rewritten too many times. But I said nothing. I just handed over the documents. Restraining order, surveillance timestamps, financial statements with her signature. They arrested her without resistance. I stood there watching, holding her in the flashlight beam like a thief caught not just in the act, but in the aftermath. She didn't say a word. Maybe because she finally understood that there was nothing left to say. Not to me, not to the kids, not to a world that had already moved on without her. Inside the house, I found the kids huddled in the hallway. I knelt beside them, arms around their shoulders, Rocket pressed between us like a living shield. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. I walked over to the window and drew the curtain shut. "We're not afraid anymore," I said softly. A year passed. Summer came back around with warm winds and clear skies. The house was filled with light again. Real, honest light. I took the kids to the beach for the weekend. Our dog ran across the sand like he'd never known anything but freedom, and there beside me was someone new. She didn't wear fake smiles. She didn't hide her phone or change her stories. She laughed with the kids and looked at me like I was worth more than convenience. We sat on the shoreline, waves brushing our feet, the sunset bleeding across the water. I held my daughter on one side, my son on the other, their heads resting on my shoulders as the ocean whispered something close to peace. I thought about how it started, how betrayal came in Bluetooth signals and gas receipts, in whispers in motel rooms, in slow corrosion of trust. And I thought about how it ended, not in fire or rage, but in facts, in quiet, in truth served cold and documented to the last decimal. Haley had tried to break a man like me, but she didn't know what I was made of. She didn't know I was patient. She didn't know I was the kind of man who lets the match drop, only after pouring gasoline for miles. And now, she wasn't free. She wasn't feared. She was forgotten. Let her watch the life she threw away from the outside, pressing her palms to the glass of a world that no longer opens for her. Let her burn. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for being with me today and listened. And if you liked my story, please subscribe, hit the like button, and comment below what you think about all this, and what would you do if you were me. Also, don't forget to check my other stories in description below.